All right, we are now live. Mr. Russ Cersosimo, how are you?
Good, man. How you doing?
Good, good. Uh, did I pronounce your last name right?
Close, Cersosimo.
Cersosimo. I skimmed over the sauce a little too much. The sauce is the most important
Don't
part,
forget the sauce.
dude. Secret sauce. Well, Russ, I'm super excited to have you on. Talk about Hemp Synergistics and your company and CBD and how that got started, and also your book and everything. But just to get started, do you want to talk about how Hemp Synergistics first came to be?
Yeah, so I had been working on software that would be able to tie cannabinoid ratios, right? So CBD, THC, CBN, all the different CB somethings or TH somethings that are in the plant, tie them to an outcome in a patient, because there was no way of measuring that, especially with all the marijuana programs being a patchwork of legal and illegal across the country. I started working with a group at Johns Hopkins to develop this software. And right around that time, the Farm Bill of 2018 was dropped, and it meant that we were legally allowed to touch anything in hemp, and all those cannabinoids are in hemp naturally. So knowing I was able to get to those and create custom formulations to tie to an actual, ailment or disease, we decided at that point it was time to just start making it ourselves, because we have the ability to then ship that all over the country and now all over the world. So that's kind of how we got started, and I pulled together a team of scientists, an executive team, and we went out and basically pitched on the idea, raised the money, and now I'm sitting in a 53,000 square foot lab where we separate the molecules. We are now developing patented delivery technology, right? So one of the things I learned when I was doing the data back in the day previous to this is when you talk to researchers and scientists and caretakers, like the parents that are giving us their children, all different delivery forms. Like, for instance, believe it or not, parents that have children with epilepsy want rectal administration of these drugs, because that's what they're used to using when the kids go into an epileptic, event. Doctors want capsules. People that do that need something like quick, like something to happen quick. They want patches. They want topical. So we started working on ways to make the current delivery forms more efficient and more effective, and improve their efficacy. And that's what Hemp Centers set out to do. And it's cool. Now we got a couple patents under our belt specific to those ingredients, and we're looking at being, game changers within the industry, and that's what we're being known for at this point. So that's kind of how we got started.
Nice, man. And so you guys have your own direct-to-consumer products, but you also do like wholesale stuff, or like, tell me about the different parts of the business.
Yeah, our main thing is we're an ingredient manufacturer, so we know that for sure CBD and a lot of these other cannabinoids are going to end up in food and beverage, as well as nutraceutical. So those are the three industries: food, beverage, and nutraceutical. They're going to end up in. Right now, everyone's seeing CBD as its own industry, right? You have the what's their name? Charlotte's Web of the world, right? Everyone's familiar with that brand name. That's why I point that out. They're currently taking hemp and they're just squeezing into a bottle, and they're putting mint flavoring in it, and that's what you get. That's what a lot of the people in the industry are doing at this point. They're not advancing it. They're not doing any kind of innovation because they really haven't had to. Well, now everything's starting to get very saturated, very saturated. It's very hard for retail brands to compete. What we know is going to be the case is you're going to start to see Oreo cookie, Nabisco. These big brands are going to start integrating CBD into their products, and they already have the shelf space. So a lot of the industry is going to end up getting wiped out as this stuff evolves, but we do know it's going into those industries. And what we've done as a company is focus on those guys and focus on selling them ingredients so they can add CBD to a joint formula or a pain relief formula, as opposed to saying, here's a CBD pill, add it to your repertoire. They'll be more targeted. They'll be better dosed, and they'll be compounded with other ingredients that help benefit. So for instance, if you want to sleep, put a little melatonin, put a little CBN, and now all of a sudden you have a recipe for sleep. This is something that, let's say, Oreo cookie or Reese's peanut butter cup want to make a nighttime cookie. They could do that, and at the end of the day, someone falls asleep because they have this stuff in there. But ultimately, we're an ingredient manufacturer that is also building these retail products, because we need to be able to hand somebody the technology in a ready to go form and say, try this. If even it's an executive at Nabisco, we need to be able to say, hey, look, eat this. Let me know if you taste it. Do you get the effects? Well, now You put that in your product versus what these other guys are doing. You're not going to have something that tastes bad. You're not going to have something that's bitter. It's not going to smell off-putting. It's not going to affect your recipe whatsoever. And now an Oreo cookie could just add our mix right to their Oreo cookie batter. Boom, they have Oreo cookies that just happen to have the perfect amount of CBD in them, as opposed to an Oreo cookie that tastes like you just bit into a piece of hemp or marijuana.
Is that normally a problem with like the bad taste or anything?
Yeah, it's so when you look at what we would call marijuana enthusiasts, someone that goes to Colorado and they're looking to get high on THC, right? Which there's nothing wrong with that. Those people typically don't care if the brownie tastes like marijuana because they're buying it specifically to get high. Now, grandma,
they're like, good.
Yeah. Now I know my medicine's in it because it tastes like it's supposed to. But with I would say truly 95% of the population, from Aunt Betty to grandma to my, great uncle so-and-so, they're not going to be ingesting something. They're not going to want to ingest something that tastes like marijuana. It is very bitter and it does have an off-putting taste. It's not something you would want every single day if that's not your thing. And, that's where the market's going to go. And ultimately they don't want that taste. So we worked on getting rid of that. And if you're dealing with an Oreo cookie of the world, they truly don't want to be in research and development on the product very long. They want to be able to take it to market after they've done their research. And with us, they're able to just add that product, be done with it, put it on the shelf and not have to worry about it. So we did a lot of the hard work for these bigger industries. They're going to be getting into it.
Gotcha. Okay. And in a way that tastes better, unlike the other companies that are on the market.
Yeah. There's a couple. There's a couple other things. So when I say technology, let's look at one of the big problems. So if I ingest any nutraceutical, whether it's vitamin B, whether it's, ashwagandha, a lot of this stuff gets destroyed in your stomach as it goes through into your lower intestine. And that's called first pass metabolism. So really you're the bile in your stomach and the acids destroy most of it to break it up. And then it goes down to your lower GI tract where it becomes bioavailable to go into your system up into the bloodstream. What we've been able to do is encapsulate at a molecular level. So imagine you have a CBD molecule, we're able to wrap it in basically a protective coating that's really a helix polysaccharide. It's an all vegan, all natural thing. We wrap it in there and that coating is impervious to stomach acids, but conveniently it opens when you have certain enzymes attack it. And those enzymes, specifically amylase, is in your lower intestine. So it works as a lock and key. You ingest it, stays intact the whole way down. Once it gets in your lower intestine, that amylase unlocks it. And boom, now you have closer to 100% of the active ingredient making it through. So for instance, someone eats, let's say a capsule that has 25 milligrams of CBD from any other person in the country, they're going to get close to 6 to 10% of the active ingredient that actually make it into the bloodstream. Oh. What we're doing is saying now we're going to get probably about 10 times more of that active ingredient into their system. And that kind of does a couple things. Like let's use THC as an example. If you went out and you bought, let's say 50 milligrams of THC, let's say it's, it's going to cost you $10 a serving. Well, we're able to put in 5 milligrams of THC and get the same exact effect. So 1/10 of the ingredient to get the same effect. So where that gets exciting is now you have, let's say CBN, right? It's the molecule that makes you sleep. Let's say that stuff's going for $30,000 a kilo. Well, you can't put something worth $30,000 a kilo into a daily capsule. It's too expensive for the end user. But if we can put something that's $3,000 a kilo because we're getting 10 times the value out of it, you get what I'm saying? Now, that's affordable, right? So, what's interesting as far as the industry goes and really this period in time is that there's an educational gap that needs bridged because a lot of people don't even understand that. They think, hey, this bottle says 50 milligrams, this bottle says 50 milligrams, but this one's cheaper. Let me just buy the cheaper one. Let me buy this one because it looks like it's a better label. At the end of the day, there's all kinds of things that you could do to that molecule itself to make it more efficient and more effective. And, that's what we're doing. And hopefully we'll end up making these ingredients for these big tier 1 manufacturers that are eventually, once this is federally legalized in food, are going to jump in. And we know right now they all have it in their R&D facility right now, figuring out how it works and doing the testing they need to so that they're ready when the government comes around to jump right in.
Yeah. I'm in Syracuse, New York, and there's a local coffee shop that has CBD in their coffee, I think. I guess it's gotten into New York a little bit.
Yeah,
You
so
do?
New York's um, a very good case here because New York was one of the first states to come around and say we want to legalize CBD for food specifically. So the marijuana program, or the marijuana industry, I should say, where you have Florida legalized it, Pennsylvania, Colorado, California, and every state has their different way of doing it. You can do this, you can do that, but they basically took their control back from the federal government as a state and said, this is what we're going to do. And they have the ability to do that, obviously, with even a Schedule 1 drug. So they're doing the same thing with CBD and food. And what's interesting is the government, or I would say New York's a good example. And New York is one of those states that a lot of people will follow because they've typically done their homework on it. So we think that based off of what New York's doing, we're going to see within the next year, probably the federal government come around, say, here's the rules, 25 milligrams is the highest dose you can do, which is what New York has said. It can't be in these foods. It can't be in baby foods. It has to be labeled. There has to be a warning. So, that's what we're going to end up seeing. It's the canary in the mine, per se, of what we're going to see in the next year and a half. But yeah, coffee shops they're the first. We're in Pittsburgh, and coffee shops right now are taking this like crazy because they want to be able to add it to their desserts, pour it right into a coffee. They're also buying a lot of our baked goods to have on the shelf. But yeah, coffee shops, they're not scared. They're jumping in.
Something to counteract the caffeine that you're getting, right? In your espresso.
Right.
So you mentioned that the market needs to be educated on some of these things, such as the potency of the product and stuff like that. Can we zoom out a little bit further? Can you kind of give me the scoop on why CBD is so important in the first place? Like, because I've heard, and again, I've done no research on like the efficacy of CBD and stuff like that. I'm pretty ripe, I guess, for an educational session here. So I've heard some people say it's a hoax and whatever, but I hear a lot of people say it's incredible. I have a feeling I know which side of the aisle you stand on, and I'd love to hear about kind of why it's so important.
Yeah. So here's the thing. So let's get into biology a little bit. So I have, every human has a respiratory system. They have a circulatory system. They have a lymphatic system. So there's 11 systems that we've been taught for the last, however many hundreds of years, let's say, maybe thousands of years, we've determined this. Well, what modern medicine has just determined is we have a 12th system called the endocannabinoid system. And it's these little receptors. And the only thing that fits in these receptors are cannabinoids, CBNs, THC, CBD, you name it. What we're finding now is that, for instance, CBD is working for pain, anxiety, inflammation, and stress. I have people that have been on Ambien for 20 years. They take a heavy dose of CBD with maybe a touch of CBN, and they're falling asleep. What's happening is these molecules are going into the system, and they're basically filling the gaps on a system that's been empty for years in a person. So if you look at what we died from in 1937, we died of typhoid fever, we died of pneumonia, things of that nature. There was no such diabetes. There wasn't cancer. There wasn't heart disease. They didn't hear about them. Now we're finding out that when the endocannabinoid system is satiated, meaning it has what it needs to function properly, it's decreasing happenings of this, right? So it's cutting down diabetes. It's helping with heart disease. It's helping with opioid overdose, which is the fourth leading killer. And the reason is because that system is now satiated. It's getting what it needs to survive. And 100% of us have this endocannabinoid system, right? So if you give someone CBD that hasn't had it in their lifetime, they're going to have certain calming effects. And that's like your respiratory system getting oxygen after holding your breath for as long as you can, right? It's flooded with what it needs, and there's beneficial things that happen. So, that's why we're seeing this stuff work, and that's why it works every single time. It's not going to take away lower back pain that's in the spine, but it's going to take away, muscle pain. It's going to take away lingering pains that people have typically had to take opioids and then eventually get addicted to, and it becomes this bigger problem. But, what I think is, hemp and cannabis were in our diet, in our pharmacopoeia for, thousands of years. They were in our diet. It was in the pharmacopoeia for, 100 different diseases back in 1937 before it was outlawed. The reason it was in there for 100 different diseases is because it works, and it works because it's giving your body what it needs so that your body can worry about other things as opposed to an endocannabinoid system that's depleted. So ultimately, that's why we're seeing this stuff work. And my prediction is because you got 14% of the country that's currently on it. If 100% of us have it, that means there's 86% of the market that's yet to get it. We're going to start seeing all kinds of once people start buying into this and it becomes a staple of the diet, like it was dating back to 12,000 BC when they found this stuff in Italy back then. You're going to see those specific diseases, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and opioid overdose decrease big time, because now the body has what it needs to actually do what it was supposed to. So that's my prediction for in 20 years, we're not going to see those as the leading killers because of specifically this plant.
Interesting. Well, I hope they curb the sugar industry and everything like that as well. But no, so 14% of people are on CBD. I never would have guessed that. Is that nationwide?
Yeah, so that's the last time I heard it was probably that could have been even 2 years ago at this point. It's probably higher now. But yeah, they had done a study, and it was about 14% of the population is currently on some sort of CBD product.
Huh. I guess I'm living in a hole, I guess. I got to get with it.
Well, I mean, I'm in the middle of the industry, so I see this stuff. It's like every minute I got somebody texting me saying, "Did you know this? Did you know this?" But yeah, it's coming around.
Yeah. Well, what has your experience been like with it personally?
So I had I got an interesting. I was always against marijuana.
Oh, really?
I mean, when I say against it, my dad was always really anti. So when most kids would get into it in high school, I didn't get into it. Right. What happened was I got a pretty bad head injury in 2000. Well, actually, I'll take a step back. I started getting involved with it a little bit when I moved out to California and started my tech company. So it kind of destigmatized it for me. Okay. And I realized it wasn't a stoner thing. You could do this in work harder. So I was finding when I started this tech company, we would break at, the end of the workday, and we all lived in a startup house, in California. And we would pass around a joint. And I started realizing that my creative focus after that was through the roof, specifically my creative focus. Right. And here about 3 years later, I ended up getting a severe head injury, a traumatic brain injury to my frontal lobe. And I didn't know I had it. I mean, I thought I had a concussion. I didn't realize it was way worse than the doctors had led me to believe, because they didn't even know. Concussions are tough right now to diagnose and measure.
How'd it happen?
I was in Tortola, Virgin Islands, and I was with my brothers and my dad. All the boys went out. They all left the wives and the girlfriends at home. There was about 8 of us. We were drinking and having fun. And my dad and my brother did something, and they did something to my back and ran this way. And I turned and just ran at them and hit a men's room this way sign right. My legs went out from under me. And here, long story short, but I ended up going through the rest of that day. I probably fell about 13 times because the initial injury was so bad. I didn't have balance. And you were able to see a timeline on my whole body. I was covered in blood and bruises and black and blue marks, and I couldn't even stand up straight by the end of the night. And I flew home the next day against doctor's orders, but I couldn't even get across the street. That's how bad it was. And ends up, it really affected me. It was really bad. Head injuries are really, really something to pay attention to when you get it, because it could make one little tweak in your brain can screw up all the other stuff. Yeah. I don't know if you ever seen those surgeries where they have someone's head open and they're doing brain surgery, but they could literally push on a part of their brain, and all of a sudden the person's talking in reverse, or they're something happens specifically because they're pushing on that part of the brain. Well, when your frontal lobe doesn't work, you don't have a short-term memory. You can't control your emotions. It's weird. And I'm a logical guy. I have no emotions at all, really. I could sit back in the middle of the most stressful situation and be okay, but not when this head injury was going on. So what ended up happening was I got back into marijuana, and it brought back that ability to focus, because I really lost that ability to focus, and that got me through about 5 years with the concussion. And here later, I was pitching a guy a marketing plan, and he owned a cranial institute, and he said, "Your left eye is not tracking right. Did you get a head injury on your left side?" And I said, "Yeah, about 5 years ago, though." And he says, "Yeah, you got a brain injury." So I've seen him about 300 times in the last 5 years. Just he goes in and does physical therapy with my head, but that's initially what got me started in it. And then, once I started to see the benefits, I became a mouthpiece for it. And I wasn't afraid to say, look, because my background's psychologist, I know like everyone's got this cognitive dissonance tied to what they believe this was supposed to be, right? Which is all tied back to Reefer Madness, which Richard Nixon saw as a kid, and then Richard Nixon became president, and he says, hey, that stuff's bad. Let's attack that as this enemy of the world. Now we have a common goal and a common enemy to fight, and it was just the wrong thing to do. I mean, here, this plant was something we needed all these years. So, once you realize it works, you jump in head first. And so after that, I ended up starting the Medical Cannabis Society specifically to go out and educate people on all the benefits, just because, it was demonized for so long. But yeah, I'm a big fan of all of them. And now that we're separating them and doing different things with different ones, it's such a versatile plant. It's great. Even on the medicine side, it's versatile. And on the textile side, it's absolutely versatile. I mean, you can make fuel, you can make car doors, you can make car tires, you can build a house out of hemp forms in 2 weeks. So it's good stuff all around. But yeah, that's how I got into it.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny you say that. I saw on your LinkedIn page there, you tweeted on your LinkedIn page, you tweeted like, your LinkedIn page, you posted an infographic about the uses of hemp, and they can be made into, I'm just looking at it now, like medicine, compost, textile, paper, rope, compost, medicine, organic compost, milk, animal feed, beer, bakery, oil, flour. Like, that's
everything.
Insane.
Our founding fathers said that this would be the crop that our country was built on.
Really?
They literally said it. Yeah. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, they grew it, and they specifically said it will be the crop that our country's built on. And you can see why. I mean, in the 1930s, this was being, it was on the cover of Popular Mechanics as the next $1 billion crop. Canvas, for instance, is named after cannabis because it was originally made with cannabis fibers. So, I mean, there's a lot to come that we, again, it's like you said, you just saw the infographic. Well, you start seeing your shirts are made out of it, your car door, your, house insulation. So it's coming.
Yeah. I bet. It's funny. I wanted to ask you, my father works in printing. So he works with a lot of big paper mills in the Northeast, and they print like legal books and like mass scale printing. And I've asked him before, like, do any of these mills do any like hemp paper? Like, what's the deal there? Just kind of curious. And I don't remember exactly what he said. I think it was something to the effect of they have all this infrastructure and all these machines that are geared up to do a certain type of paper, and it would be a pain in the ass to like change it over or something like that. But why in that specific industry? I'm curious as to why you feel like it hasn't taken hold much.
I'll tell you, it's funny you say that, because the paper industry is the entire reason, one of the major reasons, I should say, that this is illegal. So William Randolph Hearst owned all the media, all the newspapers, all the magazines. He then owned, because he had more money than anyone, he then owned the paper mills to create all this stuff. Then he owned up the supply chain. He owned all of the lumber fields. What happened was hemp was federally legal at that point. Everyone that had a farm had to grow 1 hectare of hemp to supply the war. Like I said, canvas, car tires, they could make fuel out of this. Things on ships, right? So like all kinds of stuff was tied to hemp.
And we were using it for these things at this
time?
They
were using it for these things.
Really? Wow.
Lights term. Yeah.
Why is that not taught in American history?
Because he who wins writes history, and those are the guys that won. So what happened was, and this is actually really interesting. So Hearst, it was her. So everyone had to grow it. Okay, there was this big shortage of hemp. Well, then the war ended. When the war ended, there was a big surplus of hemp. Now, what was happening there is that's bad. First of all, that's bad for the paper mills because it takes lumber like 30 years to regenerate a tree. Hemp, within like 6 weeks or 9 weeks, you have replenishment of that particular harvest. Wow. Because there was a shortage, Andrew Mellon, who was the treasurer of the United States, he worked with DuPont, and I think he was heavily invested in DuPont, the chemical company. And what they did was they went out with the mission to develop something that could be a competitor to hemp, the fiber. And they developed nylon, which we all know today. Well, because now there was a surplus of hemp, it was real bad for nylon. So Mellon, Hearst, and a couple other people all teamed up to start that Reefer Madness campaign, and they demonized hemp completely, and ended up having it wiped off the face of the earth. And it was all because of their special interests. So that's why I say it's funny that you say specifically the paper industry, because they started it.
Interesting. So it was tied into the whole Reefer Madness thing.
Yep.
Wow. I never would have guessed that. So
that's why I don't believe anything I read or see. Just turn the news and turn the TV off.
Yeah.
They're lying. Someone's lying to you for special interests.
This is true. I mean, these are they're not incentivized to tell us the truth. They're incentivized to get ratings and make money, right? So you're going to have conflict of interest. Bad incentives equals bad outcomes. But
exactly.
That's unfortunate. So that's interesting, though. So from the time the founding of the country until like mid 1900s, we were using hemp more.
Yeah, I mean, like, to the point that our founding fathers said this is going to be it for our country.
Wow.
Yep, and it was completely wiped from the books and demonized. And I mean, we grew up in an age where it was the worst thing you can imagine. And in our lifetimes, we're going to see it go the other way, which is awesome. And there's a lot that's going to come from it.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. I'm excited to see where it goes. It's just wild to think like the industry can be shaped that well. But like you said, the winners write history, right? Like I was recently looking into bidets versus toilet paper, and how like 80-something% of the developed world uses bidets. We use toilet paper just because there was some really good advertising campaign, and the inertia of that movement kept us rolling in that direction.
Wow. I didn't know that. I'll tell you, if you're looking into them, get a Toto washlet. It's the greatest.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've already got a Tushy. A Toto's better? I should swap?
Well, the Toto's the one where you press a button, the seat will, like, I go into my bathroom at night, the seat knows I'm there, it opens up, it lights everything, it starts cleaning the bowl. It's got, of course, it does all the washing stuff. It heats the seat, heats the water, blow dries after you're done. And then it sucks all the air from the toilet through a charcoal filter. So the room doesn't. I mean, it's one of the greatest inventions of all time. And it cuts out toilet paper use for the most part. Yeah, it's awesome.
That is.
Yeah, you gotta come poop at my house. It's the best.
Dude, I'm always looking for a good place to poop, Russ. Let me tell you. Wow, that's wild. That is the actual throne.
Yeah, it's the actual course. That with the squatty potty is the ultimate.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the squatty potty. My wife and I are big believers in the squatty potty. We don't have an actual branded squatty potty. Our toolbox doubles as our squatty potty. We get some weird looks when people come into our place and look in the bathroom. They're like,
"What? That's funny.
What is going on here?" Yeah, it's I don't know.
Well, I guess then you don't have to explain a squatty potty. You can say we were doing work in the bathroom. Just step over that.
Yeah, exactly. Just doing a ton of work in there. That's awesome. So I'm kind of curious. You've touched on THC and marijuana a little bit. Obviously, we talked about reefer madness a little bit. How has, in your eyes, the upcoming industry with marijuana and THC affected the growth of CBD and some of these other cannabinoids?
Well, I think awareness is a big deal, right? Like I said, there's that educational gap. Well, first you need to know what even to look at, right? So when THC was still this bad guy and everyone's fighting over it, what I noticed in the state of PA is a really good example of looking under a microscope at a typical subset of data or information. People were so radically opposed at first, right? And politicians are a good example. They're all opposed. Well, once people started getting information and seeing that kids were getting saved by this stuff, all of a sudden, now that door's peek open a little bit. Well, then all of a sudden, the politicians start realizing, wow, if I just switch my say on this, I'm not going to piss that many people off, but I'm going to grab this whole new group of potential voters. So they started coming around. It was night and day. One day they're against it. And after a couple months, all of a sudden you start seeing all these guys come around. And then these were people that were hated by the marijuana people. And all of a sudden they come around and it's this big happy family. So, we started to see that. And I think that awareness, even though it's fighting back and forth, you got this leader says it should be illegal. You got this one said it should be legal. That's all helping people become aware. And then they're going out and they're doing their own, they're doing their own research and stuff. So, they're going hand in hand. And I think ultimately they help each other. It's just unfortunate that the whole industry has been demonized because of THC. But I mean, now that you start to look at the numbers, I think it's something like 90-something% of the United States says this stuff isn't a problem and should be legalized. So all in all, it has helped contribute to the bigger mission that's let's get people educated and let's get it into their system. So, they help each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. It definitely seems like the whole thing is starting to reach critical mass where it's just undeniable and the states are going to start falling more and more and legalizing things.
Exactly. And I think, one of the big things is the people that are making the decisions have gotten over what they thought this was about. And they started looking at what it's actually doing for people that they know. And that's what I found is typically the turning point for someone. Pretty much everyone has had someone that's been on an opiate, had an opiate addiction, or like if you're in states like West Virginia and Kentucky, you go down and start asking people. They've all known someone that they've had a family member that died or a friend that died because it's that bad in those states. But usually when someone's able to see either a child stop seizing or someone get off their opiates, that's usually when whatever they thought is thrown out the window. And it's almost like if every human got to that point, I think everyone would be ingesting this stuff and be okay with it. And we're almost there.
Yeah. No, it's incredible to see. And so going back to CBD and the benefits it has, things like, just to kind of recap and make sure I'm on the same page, I don't want to miss anything. So it helps with things like anxiety, people that have issues with neurological diseases, it sounds like.
Yep.
What are some other common uses?
So you have the four main for CBD are pain, anxiety, inflammation, and sleep.
Okay.
Now you have other molecules in there like CBC, which is working specifically for Parkinson's and brain disease. You have CBN that's working for sleep. You have, I believe it's CBDA, which is the acidic version of CBD, which just has like a little extra arm on the molecule. I think that's working for I think it's helping people with attention and energy. CBG is another one. We've been testing a lot of that over here at the facility, and that's, that gives you, it's like having a cup of coffee all day, and it's there's a delicate balance because if you go over the line and have too much, then you're anxious all day. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's hundreds that we know of, potentially thousands if once we start finding genetics that express different things. But now that they're able to like really isolate and target and research has the handcuffs off to start doing actual research, we're going to start learning a lot more rapidly over the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's exciting. It seems like the more research is done, the more these things they discover, and the more we gain an understanding of how it all works and how it affects the body and stuff. Like,
yeah, and I mean the way I am, what I think is going back to what we said earlier. You have an endocannabinoid system that hasn't had any of this stuff, and now we have all these different diseases, right? You have the DSM-6, I think, which is the psychological disorder manual. When I was in psych school, it was this thick. Now it's this thick, right? And it just keeps getting worse and worse. Now that we know these molecules are working for certain things, who's to say in 20 years that stuff's going to start shrinking? Because again, you need oxygen for your respiratory system to work. Yeah, we're finding out that CBC works for brain disease, but do we even have this brain disease that we didn't know of a long time ago because we just don't have what it needs for the brain to function properly? So now, granted, we're living a lot longer, and I guess there's more room for plaque and things like that to happen in the brain. But again, I think it all ties back to these are things that once they're in our system, we're just going to start seeing people go to a homeostatic place and tie it back to why exactly it's because you have what your body needs for it to work.
Yeah, only makes sense, right?
Yep.
I've got one more question on CBD and cannabinoids, and then I want to dive into your book and hear about that. But so you mentioned pain, anxiety, sleep, and third or fourth one was
Inflammation.
inflammation. So these are all like reactive uses for this molecule. Are there any proactive uses? Like, what does that look like?
Well, like, so we're doing a podcast now with Charlie Batch, 2-time Super Bowl champ, and then the science guys from the lab, and we just had one last week. And one of the things we talked about is for pre-workout, right? So to minimize the pain and inflammation after the fact, take this stuff beforehand. For depression, that's another proactive thing. One of the things that happens hand in hand with a head injury is depression. And, I noticed, and I think that's why I was able to focus more, because when you're depressed, you cannot be creative. I said specifically earlier in the interview that creative focus was my problem. And I think a lot of that was tied to depression, tied to my brain wasn't working right and I couldn't be myself. So I think ultimately that's one of the big proactive things is getting that in your system and just not worrying about depression again because you feel good. But ultimately it's beneficial as a whole to just take. Start seeing the benefits. But yeah, those are a couple proactive things as pre-workout and depression.
Interesting. Pre-workout's an interesting use case. Are there any like pre-workout supplements that have CBD in them yet? Or they waiting on Russ to make them?
Yeah, I think one of the big problems has been mixing ingredients because things need to be in a powdered form for that. Typically you buy pre-workouts in a powdered form, and that's where that bitter taste that we were talking about earlier comes in. You want it to taste like strawberries or whatever it is, and that's been very difficult. But I lost my train of thought. What was the question?
Pre-workout with CBD in it. It's in a powder, and that
so I think I've seen a couple brands that have started to dip their toe in it. No major brands stand out yet, but just stacking it with what you have already, works just fine.
Interesting. Okay. For somebody who hasn't taken CBD before, such as myself, what would you recommend I get? Some kind of like dropper or like capsules? What?
Yeah, so I would say there's a couple things. What you want to do is you want to try different delivery forms to see how they work for you. So what we found is that if you pair CBD with 10 grams of fat in a dose, or roughly around 10 grams of fat, that increases the bioavailability, meaning how much gets into your bloodstream, by up to 14 times. Right. So it's a major differentiator when you stack those two things. Now, there's other things that you can do to improve that efficacy. And like we've talked, we're making intelligent products. We're not just squeezing hemp into a jar and saying, here, do you like mint or orange flavor? It's how much of it do you want in your system, and how would you like to put that into your system? Is it your mouth? Is it a dropper? Is it a patch? So if I was getting into it for the first time, I'd go to puresynergistics.com. I'd get the capsules. Specifically that have P450 enzyme inhibitors in it, so that it literally acts like a fullback, blocking all the things that are meant to destroy that molecule on the way down, so that you get everything into your system. They're easy to use. They won't make you tired. Now, the other thing I would get is our brownies and cookies, because now they have 10 grams of fat paired with it. So after work, you eat one of these brownies, you're chill, and you get a really, really restful, good sleep that night. And that's the reason you get real chill, and I get tired sometimes when I take it, is because it's probably getting 5 times more of the ingredient into your system over the capsules, and that's going to be 10 to 14 times more than any other capsules that don't have the P450 enzyme inhibitors and the technology that we built around the encapsulation. So those are the two products I would do. And you're young, so I don't know if you have joint pain and things like that, maybe your parents, but we have a topical balm that we make that was formulated for Franco Harris, the Pittsburgh Steeler.
Really?
The guy that caught the immaculate reception. Yeah. And it just works. If you have any kind of pain, you put it on, and within 5-10 minutes, we usually ask people, how's that pain? And they go, holy shit, I didn't even think about it. It's not there. So, and that's happened every time except for people with really deep skeletal pain in their back, which is really hard to get rid of.
Yeah. There's only so much you can do, right?
Right.
No, that's awesome. All right, I'm going to have to check that out then.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
You got it.
So now I want to talk about your book, Molecular Influence. I've heard you talk about it a little bit on other interviews and things, but I thought maybe a good place to start would be talking about how you met Billy Mays.
Yeah, so
that's incredible.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of backstory. So my grandfather was a magician. by night, I should say. He had a day job, and he would go out and do card tricks and all kinds of stuff at night. I, as a young kid, was part of a lot of his magic tricks because I was the oldest grandson. So, for instance, when he would say, hey, sit in this box, we're going to cut you in half. I didn't really get cut in half, but yet the crowd saw what they believed was me getting cut in half, right? And, as a young kid, when you see that, you realize that you can kind of influence how people think based on what they see, right? Because perception's reality. Sure. Well, my father started a security company. He ended up growing it to the largest privately held security company in the country. And I was the oldest son, and I was used very frequently in his props. At the home show, he would have me come specifically when a kid would walk past with their parents. My job was to walk out with candy, stop the kid long enough, just long enough that my dad had a conversation with the parents. And that was his magic trick, right? Well, every year in Pittsburgh, we would get a booth at the Home and Garden Show and do this. He would have his Guardian booth. And across the aisle from us every year was a guy named Billy Mays. He was from the same hometown as me and my family. And this is way before OxyClean, and he became famous. This is back in the early 80s. It was probably about 85, 86. And what was amazing is as a young kid, would see Billy Mays sell 2 of whatever he was selling to every person that watched his pitch. And it was amazing. And to think that my father had to stop, and I joke and say 1,000 people before he got a sale. He really had to go through a lot of people before someone agreed to let them into their house and sell them a security system. Whereas Billy literally has every person buying 2 of his mop or his Salsomatic or Vegematic, Walkomatic, whatever it was. And I just remember I was a shy kid, so I remember seeing it and thinking, what's he doing? And here a couple walked past me. Each of them had 2 of his mops in their hand. And the wife said to the husband, just within earshot of me, it really stinks that you can only buy 2 of these. And I realized right there, wow, he's doing a magic trick. I need to know how he's doing this. It was like my grandpa would get people to pick a card, and I would know as he's laying the cards out exactly which one they're going to pick because he knew how to manipulate that situation. Watching them do it every time, it worked. That's all the information I had to kind of go to Billy, or at least have this idea that he's doing something. So I walked up to him and I said, hey, Billy, I'd love to know how to do what you do, but better, because I was like a little punk kid and I just thought that was the way to say it. And he looked at me like, all right, you little shit. Stand next to me when I call these people up to see my pitch next time. I want you to stand right next to me, and you're going to see one by one how I pick off each one in the audience, the wives, the husbands, the kids. Got them all warmed up. I'm going to hit them with an offer they can't refuse, and they're going to buy 2 of these mops each. And it went over my head as a kid, because he was explaining a system.
Sure.
And until I actually saw it, it didn't make sense. And here, called me up on stage, and I got to see exactly what he said, where he picks off the wives, he picks off the husbands, and all of a sudden now they're nodding with him. Yeah, would you want one of these for so-and-so? Yeah. Could you use it for this? Yeah. Now all of a sudden the kids want to try this mop. And it was when the kids wanted to try the mop that I realized what he was doing, because he made me want to try the mop as a 5-year-old kid, 6-year-old kid, whatever I was. And he did hit him with an offer they can't refuse at the end, which was, if you buy 2 today, I'm going to give you the second one for free. Surely you all have a family member that could benefit from this. Give it to them for Christmas, and you don't have to think about a Christmas gift for the next 5 months. And that was enough to get them to purchase 2 of them. And that really stuck with me as a kid. And I ended up then going to psychology school, working with rats in a Skinner box. And, really animals are just human. They think like humans for the most part. They just don't lie. Right. So you can do a lot with research and find out, how this animal had a thought, because you're literally watching it in a cage and you get to see it put 2 and 2 together. And when you realize that and you can apply it to sales and things of that nature, you could build a system where, just like a magic trick or just like Billy was doing, get them to kind of land on the card you want, whether that's, a number, a sales number, whether that's a number on a money raise. You're able to do that. If you take a systematic approach. So that's how I met Billy. And, that really pointed me in a direction my whole entire life. And here it's, to kind of end that story, 25 years later, I'm in Florida. I'm in a meeting with a guy that started as seen on TV. And I knew that. I knew he started as seen on TV. That's all I knew about him. And here in a conversation, it was real casual. He kept saying, well, Billy and me and his wife are going to go down to the Keys and we're going to talk about the next. And as I hear him talking, I'm thinking, are you talking about Billy Mays? He might. Sounds like. So I said, are you talking about Billy Mays? And he said, yeah, why? And I said, oh my God, I'm his biggest fan. Like, he would remember me. And he says, yeah, right, kid. Everybody says that. I said, no, I swear to God, if he knew my name, he would. Well, sure enough, his phone rang right there. And he looked at me. He says, up, speak of the devil. Hey, Billy, I got a kid here from McKees Rocks that says he knows you. And he points the phone at me, and I literally see Billy Mays on the phone, right? Like, if it was Spider-Man or Michael Jackson, who were my big, I mean, that's really my three people I wanted to be when I was that age. It was as if Spider-Man was calling. So here I got on the phone with him, and I said, Billy, Russ Cersosimo with Guardian. He says, get the heck out of here. And I says, no, not my dad, because we have the same name. He said, no, the 7-year-old kid that freaked me out when he said he wanted to learn to do what I did, but better. And I started tearing up, like, as I was 32 at the time, and to realize that you're the guy you had always looked up to your whole life as a role model, remembered who you are, and remembered your name and what you said to him literally 25 years later, was pretty awesome. And he said to me, he said, the reason I remember that so vividly is because when you said to me, when you looked me in the eye and said, I want to learn to do what you do, he said, I realized that I have to start looking at myself as a role model and adult, because kids are going to be looking at me like this. And that was touching to me, because he would remember that. And I had a little piece, in his life as a memory. And so here he said, look, I'm filming this new TV show on the Discovery Channel called Pitchmen. I'd love to have you come down and be on the final episode, and we'll do an interview, and we can explain your situation, how you had looked at me growing up. And I did, man. I got to go down and hang out with him on the set, write material for him. I was there for the filming of the Zorbies infomercial, and here I ended up getting on Discovery Channel as right there with my idol. So that's my Billy story, and he really pointed me in a direction in my life, and I wanted to be him. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
No kidding. So is the Discovery Channel thing available still?
It's there. Now, here's what happened. So the week before, or I would say 2 weeks before it was supposed to air, Billy died of a heart attack. And what they did was, rather than make this make it weird, they nixed that final episode, and they did like a tribute episode instead. And I was on the tribute episode, but I didn't have my interview and all that. It was more just video clippings and things like that. But at the end of the day, it was still cool to be part of it. But unfortunately, he died right in the middle of it, and it didn't go down as planned. So that part.
Yeah, that was terrible. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
That's funny though. That should be the title of this podcast. I had 3 idols: Spider-Man, Michael Jackson, and Billy Mays. That's incredible.
Honest to God, what's funny is Michael Jackson and Billy Mays died within, I think, a week of each other, and they were both 50 years old, which is interesting. And I remember saying that week, oh man, thank God Spider-Man's fictional. Otherwise, it's a good shot he'd be dead this week.
Hey, he's hanging on. He'll never die. Don't worry. As long as we've got to keep putting out movies,
that's right.
He'll be around.
That's right.
That's funny. So it sounds like this book has been a long time coming then. Was there a point where you were just like, I got to start working on this book, or
what happened was kind
of working on it, or?
Yeah, what happened was it's interesting how books come together, right? Because I started it probably, I would say 13 years before it actually went to print. And I was working for my dad at the time, and I was hands down the best. I sold more per customer than anyone in the company times 10. So if I sat down with somebody, I was getting 10 times more on a deal than anyone else by average on the company. And the only person then that was even close after I had already been there was my brother. And after 3 months, he had, I want to say it was about half of my selling average. And it was because I explained how to systematically walk into a meeting and say this, don't say this, say this, don't say this. When they do this, lean back. So I had a system. And he was able to utilize that system and prove that my system worked better than whatever system my dad's company was teaching by, to him 5 times. So here I went to my dad and I said, look, let me develop a training program for everybody. And he said, do it. So I took about 3 months. I wrote, binder about this thick with images. I learned Photoshop. And, back then that was like late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, it was a tough job to get that stuff done at that time. So here I ended up presenting. I remember the day I handed him a binder about this thick, and I said, Dad, here it is. And he said, here's what? And I said, this is the training program. Like, couldn't wait for him to open it up. He pushed it back to me and he says, oh, we decided we're not going to do that. And I know my father really well, and I know that means that he's not going to do it. And I said, why? And he said, well, we decided that we're just not going to do it. And I said, who's we? Like, I never heard you use we when it came to making a decision about your company. And he says, yeah, you're right. I decided you're not going to. And I said, why? He said, well, I don't want to have anyone think that I gave my son a favor, a special favor. And I said, Dad, I proved it. Like, I've been proven I'm the best. You're not going to think that,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, thank God Rusty's program is now available to everybody. And he said, yeah, we're not going to do it. And I remember just it took about 3 seconds of letting it sink in and already knowing my dad's going to stick with what he said. And I said, all right, ADT will buy it. ADT was the biggest competitor, the biggest in the country. I pulled it back, and he said, yeah, good luck. And here, about 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, something like that, his parent company came back after they had gotten word that I was going to, that I had this and that I was going to take it to ADT. And they said, give him 30 grand and tell him to give it back to us and sign a non-compete. Says he can't do that. And I gladly took the money, signed the non-compete, told him to take it back. And I went and started a tech company with that money in my 401k. And I put that information and that content aside. And here I was doing an event I had an event scheduled at this college where I put the event together, and I had experts from all over the country flying in. And one of the experts the night before called me and said, Russ, I can't speak in my time slot. And I real quick realized the only person that was going to be able to drive 3 hours to this college in 24 hours to speak for 90 minutes was me. I was going to have to do it. And I thought, what are you better than, what are you good at that you could honestly say if you sat in a room and you explained it to them, that they would learn something from it, right? That they could actually look at you as an expert. And I remember sitting there thinking for about, 20, 30 minutes, just pacing around. I thought, you know what? As far as influence goes, there's not many people that have taken rats in a Skinner box, psychology background, 20, 30 years of practice, learning from a pitch man and son of an entrepreneur that actually taught him from a young age, this is what you need to worry about. So I had truly 30 years experience of influencing people, even down to a magician level. And I thought, this is probably something I could put a presentation on. And I had pictures of me and Billy Mays and me with the magician, all these things that when they saw it, they're like, hey, man, this guy knows what he's talking about. He lived it. And I got done with the 90 minutes. And I said, now, does anybody have a question? Could everyone go out and raise millions of dollars right now if they wanted to on an idea? And all of a sudden, nobody, crickets, right? And I started sweating, right? In that 1 minute. And here, the sharpest dressed guy from a company named Shimatsu, it's like a $4 billion company, raised his hand and he said, Russ, you need to write a book. He said, I have literally had, Shimatsu has paid for every sales training on the globe to come in. Sandler, Carnegie, Tony Robbins, we've done them all. You just brought to light in the most simplest form a systematic approach to going about influence, as opposed to coming up with all the and all these different things like foot in the door in the face. He said, you literally explain it down to a research level so that people can understand it and then go out and actually utilize it, as opposed to hearing some sort of catchphrase that they're supposed to just, there's one thing they learn from it. And they go, if you learn the research tied back to it, you start to think like the researcher. And it was funny because as soon as he said that, all of a sudden hands started going up. Like he broke the seal. And next guy I asked the question to was a psychiatrist who's probably the only guy in the room that could out me on what I said. And he said, Russ, honest to God, I have never seen something so well laid out in relation to sales and psychology. He said, kudos to you. And right there, when I had those two people in the room that kind of showed me that, I could be an authority in this, it was right there that I went to work on the book and in the framework. And it took me about 3 years, but not because it took three years to write. It's because it took me about 3 months to write it. Then I decided it needed to be put into a better framework so that people could easily apply it. And then I spent like 7 months redoing the framework and then rewriting it, which, after you do it with print and editors and all that, it takes a lot of time. So it took me about 3 more years, but ended up getting to print, and we go hard launch on August 14th. So I'm pretty excited about it.
August 14th. Got it. Awesome. That's wicked cool. That's an incredible story, just having to speak on something for 90 minutes in a 24-hour notice. That's got to be, that must have been a tough phone call.
It forces you to really put everything in perspective as to what you could speak about, right? There's no time to think. It's got to be, now you got to figure out, and it ended up working. So you wonder why things happen. Everything happens for a reason. So that guy was meant to cancel that day. So
yeah, it's incredible. So you mentioned that guy said that he's done, Robbins and Dale Carnegie and all those other things, and nobody's like touched on it the way you did or been able to explain it or systematize it, what have you. What do you think that you see that maybe some other people don't see as it relates to influence?
So think about this. So, you've heard of Pythagorean theorem, right? A
Of course.
squared plus B squared equals C squared. So if I have A and B, I can always determine C, right? It's a mathematical law. We'll figure that the human brain is going to try and put two things together always, right? And when you watch a rat in a Skinner box, you know that if rat pushes lever, hears sound, sees light, and then food drops, after so much exposure to that, they're going to put two and two together. They're holy shit, if I push this, I'm going to be able to eat. And that's called a heuristic, when the brain goes, aha, like a eureka moment. So what you're able to do is you're able to take A and B and put it in front of somebody and know that their brain's going to come up with C. And if you know what kind of information to put in front of people, you're able to start applying that and really kind of get where you want. And a lot of times, that someone's thinking A, and if you put that B, then they're able to then compute what you want. And that's ultimately, how this works. But what you're able to see is, what does that person need to see, right? What I should say is, what you're able to look at is, what does that person need to see for them to come across, or make the decision in my favor. And then a lot of times that, you need to prove that you're an authority, right? It's like, people look at me and they ask a hemp question. They know that I'm going to give them the answer, the right answer, or closest to right, I should say, in this world where we're, still a moving target with this stuff.
Sure.
Now, what that might also do is influence them to believe I'm just an expert in all things, right? Which isn't the truth. But because I have that perceived white coat on in certain things, that's why they'll have doctors do commercials on TV, and it will even say right under them, I'm not a real doctor, but you believe it anyways because you see them in a white coat. And I'll give a good example of how that works. And I'm specifically talking about the law of authority, which I talk about in my book. One of the CBD stores around here, I was doing research, and I went into a competitor. I'm not really in retail, but a guy that would be competing with me if I was doing retail, had an actual storefront. And what he was doing is he had people in white coats there that would explain cannabinoids and their use and things like that. So I walk in, I'm talking to two really young guys. And it's obvious they're very young, but they both have these white coats on. And, after about 10 minutes of talking with them, I realized they're super sharp. They know this stuff through and through, like more so than I would have expected for even a doctor. So here I looked at the kid and I said, where'd you get where did you go to school for, to become a doctor? And he says, oh, I'm in high school. and it registered, and I heard it loud and clear. Well, then, like, later in the conversation, he tells me he plays saxophone. And I said, hey, I started a band and I'm looking for a saxophone player. Like, you want to come try out? He said, yeah. So next week he's at my house and he's playing so I look at him and I said, so, like, he's hiring doctors down at that CBD store? And he said, no. What do you mean? I'm like, you're a doctor, right? And he said, no, I'm in high school. And I said, that's right. But, like, the fact that I saw him in that white coat sunk in, and I literally perceived him as this young doctor that played saxophone. And it took him like 2 or 3 times to tell me that. But I would have literally believed a lot of stuff that he said because I saw that white coat on him. And it was hard to forget that white coat. So, there's things that when the brain knows it and it's there subconsciously, it makes other things easier, right? So, law of authority, social proof. If you have a friend that says, hey, man, this product I just ate, it works like you wouldn't believe. You might forego all research on the product just because a friend told you it was good. So that's another checkbox, like social proof. They're the authority. Scarcity. There's a fear of missing out. There's only so much of this left. Well, how many stupid decisions have you made on something because you thought there was only one left? Or you hurry up and grab at it. So that's really an invisible thing. I mean, I could say to someone, there's only one left, even though and that's what Billy used to do. He'd say, I only have so many of these left for the show. He'd sell all the ones that people saw on the front of the stage. And then he'd be collecting the money, counting the money, walk around back and reload the front of the stage with hundreds of these things that he had, by the truckload from China. But the perceived thought that there was only so many left would force people to buy quicker. Another checkbox. So there's commitment and consistency. That's why they say get people to say yes, because once they start saying yes, well, it's because once we commit to something, it's uncomfortable for us mentally to go against that. So when you say, hey, well, if I could do this today, would you do this? And I know that's like the hokey sales way of saying it. But for example's sake, if I could do this, would you do this? If someone says yes, it's real hard for them to say later, well, you know what? I'm changing my mind. And you go back and you say, but you said this. And wow, you're right. I did say it. Let me remain consistent.
Yeah.
Again, another checkbox. So what the book is all about is knowing those. Really, there's 6 checkboxes at 2 different checkpoints in the process of dealing with someone in where you want to influence. And if you know, when I get to this point of the story, the brain's looking for X, 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 and X. And then once I check all those off, I could comfortably move to the next part, which is the climax or the close or resolution, whatever you want to call it. And now I just have to worry about these other 6 things that continue to make them feel warm and fuzzy. And then once I get past that, as long as I kept them in the friend zone, and was able to get through all that, you're good. I mean, you got a pretty good chance that whatever your goal was in the beginning, whether it was I want to sell this product, I want to close this deal, I want to raise this money, I want to convince my wife to quit being mad at me, whatever it is, if you get through those check boxes, the brain is in a homeostatic situation where it's comfortable making a decision, and then it's typically in your favor as the influencer because you made sure you gave them everything they needed so that they can come to a comfortable decision without feeling uncomfortable. That's really what it comes down to. Is if people are uncomfortable, it's a crapshoot. If they're comfortable and you gave them everything they need, it's a pretty good chance they're gonna comply with your ask.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's all about creating the right conditions for them mentally to be able to say yes at the end of your pitch.
Yep.
That's cool. Maybe what is it? Cialdini doesn't have anything on you, huh?
Well, I'll tell you, Cialdini's part of the reason I wrote it, because I read Cialdini's Weapons of Influence back in, I would say 99, maybe 2000. And, as a kid that was in psych school, one day working with rats in a Skinner box, literally the next day, in the morning when I'm not in class, I'm out door knocking to sell security systems. So it was real easy to apply stuff because I'm learning it Tuesday. Wednesday, I'm out knocking on doors and I see, wow, I could use this, or I could do this, or, like a rat, if I just put this in front of a person, then they're way less, there's way less of a chance they're going to oppose what I'm saying. And so it literally, the education and then the application was happening that quick. So you start to see that stuff and you start to apply it. But it works, man. I'll tell you, it's pretty interesting. Psychology is a pretty awesome thing.
Psychology is pretty awesome, man. I was telling you before, we went live that I went to school for accounting and whatever. But I ended up abandoning that whole thing to get into marketing because for the sole reason that I think psychology is just fascinating. Like I didn't get into it when I first went off to school, but I remember being in high school and I never went to the library ever. I think the only time I went in when I had to for class, and one other time I went in and picked up Blink by Malcolm Gladwell off the shelf and read that, and I was like, holy shit, this is wild.
Yeah.
Like there's so much it's funny how if you're not aware of these things, you don't realize how subject you are to them.
Exactly.
It's
that's why I say it's the most powerful weapon of destruction. Because if you're not aware of it, look at what's going on with the media right now. They start saying Delta variant, Delta schmariant. Okay, in my eyes, it's literally fear to push people to get this vaccine. And it's I asked my friends who have been anti-vaccine, and all of a sudden they get the vaccine. So what changed? Well, they're saying it's happening in Spain. People are dying. It's like you're watching TV. Turn it off. You wouldn't even think about Delta variant. You know what I mean? Look at the data that says that you have a 0.008% chance of dying, and then look at the flu virus. It's relatively the same. Like, are you worried about the flu? No, because you're used to it. So psychology is so powerful, and it's an invisible weapon of war if you need it to be, but also could be a good way to help defend yourself, and also a good way to go influence the world for change. Right? It depends how you want to use it. And it's funny because people ask me to sign the book after you give it to them, and I say, one of the things I write is you have an opportunity to use this for good or evil. Make the right decision.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's an excellent point. They're powerful tools we have in our hands, and if we're using them, then gotta be aware of what the consequences for it are. Because we were talking about before the show a little bit too, like just with you bring up the mainstream media, like we're optimizing for ratings and revenue, and not the well-being of our country.
Yep.
And without even getting into data and numbers about the Delta and everything like that, like we just have the wrong, forget all that. We just have the wrong incentive structures in the first place. Like
Yep.
that's
exactly right. Money.
It seems like to me that typically humans take the path of least resistance. And
our brain does that, which is why the book was even written, is how to play on this path of least resistance, because the brain likes, they say we only use 20% of our brain, and that's because your brain knows if this, then this, and it could go right back to what it was doing. And it doesn't have to communicate with all kinds of other parts of the brain because it's used to taking the path of least resistance, going right back to homeostasis, so it could focus on other things. And that's the truth. We're built to look for that, and less pain, like whatever causes less pain gives better, more pleasure. But yeah, ultimately that comes on a path of least resistance as well.
I think we could probably talk about psychology and influence forever and ever, but I do want to ask you about one more thing before we wrap this up. I was listening to an interview of yours, and you mentioned alternative sleep cycles. I forget the name of the
polyphasic sleep.
Polyphasic sleep. And I saw that and I was like, holy shit, jogged my memory of a time when I was in between semesters in school in the winter. I was living at home with my parents, and I experimented or tried to experiment with the Uberman sleep cycle, which is 30 minutes every 6 hours instead of your normal 8-hour interval sleeping. If for anybody listening that doesn't understand polyphasic sleep, it's just different sleep cycles. I remember doing some math and thinking, wow, if I can buy back 6 hours out of every day of my life, that's like an extra 20 years of life or something like that. Like how could I not give this a whirl? But I did a terrible job at it. It only lasted.
It's hard to get over that first hump, which is you literally have to deprive yourself of sleep for days before your body's even ready to start this stuff. And then 2 weeks, it's miserable. The first 2 weeks, as your body's readjusting and reprogramming itself based on, what you've now dealt it as a hand with options as far as sleep go, it's miserable. But when you could get through that 2 week period, it's ugly. That's where all of a sudden it opens up and you're able to do it. But that's why a lot of people can't do it. And that Uberman is one of the toughest ones to do. And that's what I did. Mine was actually, I think it was Uberman. I think it was 20 minutes every 4 hours is when you sleep for 20, you're up for 4. And, it's wild because when you get to that point, like I remember being up at 4 a.m., I would try to find people that were up. I'd be at Walmart. I remember I'm at Walmart. I knew every person at Walmart that worked the late shift. Like literally all these old ladies, like Russ is here. I go in and I'd say, listen, ladies, today I want to learn to sew. Like 3 a.m. I'm buying all this, yarn and all this stuff. And I did. I learned to sew. And it's like, okay, what else can I take in? Because the world's sleeping, and eventually it got into book and biotech and band and all these other things. But, at first it started with, hey, you have all this extra time. What do you do with it? Let's learn to sew. And it was really wild. It was kind of cool because I told you that first couple of days is absolute misery. And I've done it twice. And the first time I did the 2 weeks where you just try to get into the 4 hours right off the bat. And that's hard. It takes a long time. Then I went and I researched and they said, look, if you deprive yourself of sleep for 3 days, you're up for 3 days, your body is way more apt to adjust to this in that first cycle, second cycle, third cycle. So I, at Walmart, my thing became with the ladies as I walked in, you guys got to keep me up for 3 days. So I'm going to come in at like 2 a.m. when I'm starting to get real tired, and I'm going to ask a million questions, and I'm going to stay under this, fluorescent light and all the things that are going to help me stay up. And I remember I was walking out at, it was about 6 a.m. on day 3 of Walmart when it was the last day, and I wasn't at Walmart the whole time, just at night. And I walked out and it was daylight. And I remember saying to myself, I did it. Like I made it through the ugly phase to there. And once you get there, like I said, it's a whole different world because the rest of the world's asleep. And there's a certain level of calm that happens around 3 or 4 in the morning when the rest of the world dies down. When you have an unbelievable level of laser focus because there's no email dinging, there's no phone coming at you, there's nothing you can watch on TV. And, you really, really have tons of time to take in information. I think I did the math once, and I think it's something like, you're you have like an extra like 3,000 hours a year of time to do things. I mean, you only work for 2,000 hours a year,
Yeah.
So, put that together and see what you do. And, a lot of people say, how do you do all this stuff? You got a band, a biotech company, you're writing a book, you got all this stuff going on. It's cut out TV and start to adjust your sleep schedule so that if you need it, you can do that. Now I've gone back to sleeping 6-8 hours. I like to sleep 8 hours now when I can. But if I had my choice, I would do polyphasic for the rest of my life. The problem is people they look at you like you're weird. I'd be at a wedding and I'm going to go leave the wedding for 20 minutes to go sleep in the car and be like, that's weird. And I'd come back and I'd if you feel like you slept for 8 hours, but you actually program your brain to go into REM sleep within 8 minutes of closing your eyes. And you wake up and feel like $1 million. The only downside is that at the time I was living in a house that had a hard floor. I was in Phoenix, and I had a tile floor, and I was barefoot all the time. And standing up for that many hours a day without laying down starts to take a toll on your feet. Really, that was where it started to hurt. But that was it was the greatest thing, and I'd suggest if you ever an opportunity to do that, commit to it. Have a buddy that goes through it with you so that you can talk to someone, at the hours of the night when everyone else is sleeping. But get through it and see what happens. I mean, you literally can achieve whatever you want because you have the time. And that's our biggest limitation in life is time. It's the only thing we can't buy more of and find more of. You can only live so long. So squeeze every minute out of it you can.
I mean, when I was doing that math, I was like, yeah, you can't buy more time, but holy shit, this is a great way to use more of it. At least
can find more of it, right?
Yeah, it's insane. But how the hell did you stay up for 3 hours?
Stay up for 3 or 3 days?
I'm sorry, 3 days, 3 hours.
Well, quite honestly, at the time, I was on a lot of Ritalin.
All right, that'll do it.
So that helped. But I was drinking Monsters. I was prescribed Ritalin. Well, it was actually Focalin back in the day, and now marijuana's fixed all my ADD problems, right? If it was even ADD, it changed my diet. It was artificial ingredients and all the toxic shit. It's in your system that just gets you wired. But I remember specifically I would go and get lottery tickets and Monster drinks on those 3 days. That was like my thing. I'd go meet the guy at 7-Eleven. I'd try all the different Monsters. They'd keep me up, scratch lottery ticket, really anything you could to keep your attention levels up or, or the excitement levels up. And, yeah, it's hard, but you can do it. You can do it.
Oh,
go to Walmart. Like you can't fall asleep standing up in an aisle.
Yeah, that is for sure. Man, that is crazy. It's with the whole I feel like there's been a resurgence with that Matthew Walker's book that came out, Why We Sleep or something like that. There's been this whole resurgence about re-emphasis on sleep and how important sleep is. Is there any literature, do you know, on polyphasic sleep? Like, does it have any? Because you mentioned like that.
I know. I think there's a guy by the name of. Oh, sorry, you froze. I thought you handed it off to me.
No.
So there's a guy. There's a guy named, I think it's Steve Pavlov, that wrote a blog on it, and to me, it's probably the most in-depth breakdown of what a day-to-day. This would look like day to day to someone that wanted to try it. And I say that's a great starting point because he talks about the failures. He talks about, what he learned from the first time. He talks about how it affected him and his wife. I know with my girlfriend, she started to get really irritated that I wasn't sleeping in bed with her. It drove her crazy that literally every night for a year and a half, I found other stuff to do besides sleep. So I know, there's little things like that you don't think about until you read someone else's, vicissitudes related to the circumstance. But it's I would say, look at Steve Pavlov's blog. I think, Tim Ferriss, who wrote 4 Hour Workweek, I think he talked about it.
Really?
But it's so difficult to get to the other side of it that a lot of people can't do it. But yeah, look at I think it's Steve Pavlov, his blog.
Okay. I'll check it out. It's
Mhm.
I'm curious because like, we eh, you mentioned like you drop into REM sleep almost instantly, as opposed to having all these other stages of sleep. Like you wonder if somehow we were able to have like 20-year studies on what it's like to be on this schedule. Like I wonder if there are any negative benefits to eliminating those other sleep cycles that we just don't know
We
about in the
don't know about,
short
right?
term.
Right.
Because obviously, the human body is such a complex system. It's interesting to think about. But
Yeah, well, they're
yeah,
starting. I mean, now there's what's cool is they're starting to do really cool research to kind of figure out what's going on. And then like dreams, like everyone's wondering what dreams are, right? You have like
yeah,
what Freud thinks they are. You have, what Jung thinks they are. There's all these different, opinions. Well, what researchers just recently did is they took rose colored glasses and put them on people as an experiment, and they would analyze their dreams. And here they found out that when people were taking information from the day, it seems that they're taking information from the day and storing it. Because, for instance, if I saw you in my dream tonight and I had the red glasses on when I saw you today, you're gonna have this red hue to you. So they started putting two and two together that it's basically the brain taking information somehow and storing it. Like we've gotten that far that it's not that you're thinking all these weird things. It's that you're taking something that happened and maybe it's in a weird situation or there's a weird background or whatever, but it's that particular thing that your eyeballs actually saw that day or an experience you had that you're somehow integrating into storage. We just haven't figured out exactly yet, the next step or why. But yeah, so
yeah,
that's what we're finding out. So I mean, what I found out from the sleep thing, you definitely don't need those other stages. At least over a year and a half. Nothing.
yeah,
Like I said, besides my feet hurting, that was the only thing. And who would have thought that you'd be able to train your brain to literally 6 minutes after you walk out of the door at the wedding and go sit in the car, you're literally going through then 8 minutes of REM. You wake up 100% feeling like you just slept 8 hours. I mean, it's magical kind of. So I suggest trying it if you ever
yeah.
get the chance.
That's nuts. Maybe I'll have to try it again. I don't know if I could convince my wife to do that. She loves a full 8, 9 to 10 hours if possible.
Yeah, she can be a
But
tough one to convince. Read my book
for sure.
first before you propose it to her.
What's that?
Read my book first before you propose it to her, and it should be a little easier to convince her.
I will. She won't be able to say no. All right, Russ. This has been a pleasure, man. I feel like I could chat with you all day about various things. But I guess just to wrap things up, kind of out of the box question here. What is the most valuable piece of advice you would give to a young adult about to enter the workforce?
I mean, I think what changed the way I perceive things is to focus on a goal. So, like, I'll give an example. If I want to, for instance, jump into the marijuana industry, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm gonna jump in," and but I don't know where I'm gonna jump in. Well, chances of you succeeding when you don't know, how's anyone else gonna know, right? But if you say, "I want to be this exact thing," and that's what you start talking about in your conversations, you're talking about how that's what you want to be. You pick that goal, you're going to start to shape your reality so that happens, or I should say more efficiently and effectively happens in your favor. But a lot of people don't pick a goal. And if you do that, you take your first step in the wrong direction and then your second step because you thought you were going the right way. And 100 steps later, you could be 100 steps from where you wanted to be or completely in the wrong direction, going the wrong way. So I think pick a goal and, that really helps. The other thing is visualize. Like it took me a while to understand the true power of visualizing. And, that kind of goes along with picking a goal. Once you pick the goal, you can start to visualize all the things that need to happen for you to get where you're going. And, there's a certain power to thoughts become reality. They become things. So, the power of your thought, what direction you're going, what the goal is and how you see that happening, really, really will help with success. And I think that was the thing that changed in my life when I started to realize I'm in control of my own destiny, but only if I know what the heck I'm doing or where I want to go with it. And that's kind of where everything changed. So that would be my suggestion to anyone jumping in.
It's a powerful piece of advice for sure. It's what you focus on expands, right?
Right. Exactly.
Love it. So, Russ, this has been a pleasure, man. Do you want to tell everyone where they can find you and where they can find your book on
Yeah.
August 14th?
Yeah. So if you go to, you can go on Amazon, search Molecular Influence, the book, or go to my website, molecularinfluence.com. There's a link there to get it. As far as how to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm there every day. Hit me up. And, it might take a couple of days, but I typically respond to everything unless it's a crazy sales call for something I don't need.
There you have it. Russ Cersosimo, thank you so much, my friend.
You got it. Thanks, Andrew. It was fun.